was exactly 11 months ago here on this channel that I presented the idea of hip-hop's new darling Jack Harlow being on the clock. In that video, I discussed the achievements and shortcomings of his second album. It would seem a lot of you shared the same sentiment because around the time of the release of Come Home the Kids Miss You, the whole internet collectively said, "Oh, brother, this guy stinks!" That's the reaction you tend to get when your second album is littered with nothing but corny bars, especially considering the fact that it's only your second album. You should still have plenty of life experiences to draw inspiration from, but instead, he chose to give us.
My grandpa would have a heart attack if I pulled 100 grand out, so I'm not gonna pull 100 grand out.
Since that release, Mr. Harlow has been lying low. I mean, you'd occasionally see him sitting courtside at an NBA game, but it's obvious he's been living in the studio because less than a year later, he has stealth dropped his third album titled Jackman. Jack clearly wants to be taken more seriously as an artist, and no more evident than that is the album cover. I mean, let's examine the cover. Here we have Mr. Harlow standing half naked with his arms folded as he mean mugs into the camera. And behind him, we get a small look into the humble Kentucky town that raised him. And to the right, you'll find 4 copies of his last album leaning against a basketball hoop. Jokes aside, the album does represent the tone of the album very well. There's 2 ways I would describe this album. First, I'm gonna reference my friend Steve's tweet because his description of the album was funny, but it is true. He goes on to say, rappers get slandered and they jump right back to the old reliable soul samples. Now, I would describe this album as 24 minutes of side beat cuts, and depending on who you are, this may or may not be for you. I have to admit, Jackman is a superior album to his last, but Mr. Harlow still hasn't stuck that landing for me. I describe this album as a French toast recipe that calls for 2 eggs, but you only have 1. It still turns out okay, but the flavor isn't all the way fleshed out, if that makes sense. You can tell the criticism of his last album really got to him on Jackman because this album is a total 180 from his previous work. Jack Harlow was kind of in that pop rap lane, but there isn't a single on Jackman. Don't expect anything that you can sing along to, but instead 10 tracks of him trying his hardest to prove he's a real MC. Unfortunately, he falls short for me. The production's good here. It's a bunch of boom bap and soul samples. The rhyming's on beat. Sonically, it sounds good. So in terms of hitting that quality threshold, Jackman achieves that. But in terms of making me feel anything, the album falls short. I'm not gonna hold you. This album is 24 minutes and like 15 minutes of it is him exposing his insecurities. Now, normally that's a good thing for an artist to be open with their audience, but the problem is his insecurities aren't relatable to most. He's not talking about everyday stuff. This album is him crying about how he was labeled the next it guy in hip hop and he's struggling to live up to that hype. It's hard for me to feel bad for him. I would if he was labeled the it boy against his wishes, but the way he's carried himself in interviews and appearances kind of reeked of diva who already made it. Now you can't live up to the hype and you want me to feel bad for you? Make better music. When he's not crying about not being able to live up to the hype, the rest of the album is kind of just word salad. Word salad that is hard carried by the production.
Say it ain't so, Joe.
It's easy to miss what's actually being said when most of the songs sample classic soul records, so you'll get caught up in bobbing your head and you might not even have your listening skills on. But I promise you, if you turn them on, you'll see that you're not really missing much lyrically. I mean, the biggest offender is track 5 titled Gang Gang Gang. I was jogging my dog when this record first came on, and I literally had to stop and walk to listen closer to make sure I was hearing what I was hearing. Upon listening to this track several more times, I have no clue what purpose it serves. In the lyrics, he reveals how some of his friends he grew up with turned out to be bad people. One ends up becoming a word that I can't say or I'll get demonetized, so we'll just say grapist if you catch my drift. And another friend becomes a pedo, and these individuals become the gossip of his town. I think the purpose of this record is to remind people of how you and your friends start off in life isn't always how you'll end up. You just never know what path people will take. The problem is there's so much more emphasis on the shock factor of certain words like grapist and pedo that I felt like whatever message he was trying to convey got lost in translation. Yes, some people you went to high school with will end up being problematic. What else? Is that supposed to be some type of deep message? It reminds me of the ending in The Last of Us 2. Y'all remember that? Revenge is bad. Oh, okay. Like what else, Captain Obvious? And I take no issue with Jack Jack challenging himself lyrically, but understand, if you're gonna hop into that Nas, Kendrick Lamar type of lane, understand I am going to judge you that way, so you better come correct. Where he does manage to get things correct is on records like No Enhancers and Questions. No Enhancers is probably the closest thing to a single on this album. It teeters between that pop rap and lyrical lane I believe he's trying to find. If Jack isn't, I believe that should be his lane. I mean, please don't take this as disrespect, but you're just not Rakim, dude, and that's okay. I see him in that ladies man, cool guy lane, kind of like LL Cool J, but you know, he can still give you a few bars. I think Jack just needs to be a little bit more concise about the direction he wants to go as an artist. Stop crying that you can't live up to the hype and focus on stronger concepts for your records. No Enhancers shows that he has potential, and as for the album as a whole, I give it like a 6 out of 10. This is definitely better than his last offering, but there's plenty of room to still improve. The album is only 10 tracks too, so it's not a huge time commitment, and for that reason alone, I'd say at least give it at least one listen. You might enjoy it more than I did. But if you're asking me how I personally feel, I'd say I'm indifferent about Jackman. If someone wants to play it on the aux cord in the car, I wouldn't demand that they turn it off, but I also wouldn't get excited if someone played it in the car either. But hey, I'm just saying.